Howdy, friendos. My name is Stuart, and I don't normally make videos like this, but I was working on some content coming up, mostly Baldur's Gate stuff, and I came across something on Twitter that annoyed me. Yeah, I know, that's my fault, right? Coming across on Twitter and expecting it to be good, but this one in particular was particularly egregious because it's just a bunch of people who know nothing about anything commenting and throwing a moral fit over nothing. Now, obviously, I know you guys didn't make a big fuss about this. I can guarantee that there are at least 85,000 people out there with enough common sense to understand the difference between fiction and reality. But if you're one of those people who aren't subscribed, and you are one of those people who do understand between fiction and reality, hit that little button for me. I'm trying to hit 100,000 by the end of the year, and I am really, really close, and we're making progress. So do that for me, would you? Anyway, cutting to the chase real quick, a bunch of information was leaked from Game Freak servers, the guys who make Pokemon, and with that information, there were a bunch of really cool things, like original concept art, behind-the-scenes information, cut content, things like that. All very interesting and very cool, but the thing that people are just nonstop talking about right now are some of the origin myths. Now, Pokemon myths are nothing new. If you played Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, there is a Sinnoh library with a bunch of these stories. The most famous one in particular is the Veilstone myth, which is about a swordsman who went around killing Pokemon and regretted it. I even featured that myth pretty heavily in my own Pokemon D&D campaign. Back when MatPat was around, he actually would bring up these Sinnoh myths quite often, and I think one of Game Theory's best videos was a crossover video he did with another Pokemon content channel where he explained that in the Pokemon world, at least, humans basically are a type of Pokemon. They're just kind of like an off-branch sort of thing. And this is very important because this is relevant to the discussion today. And the myths that were leaked in this set of documents were clearly some of the rejected ideas. And it's going to be very clear very soon why these ideas were rejected and left in the cutting room floor, because a lot of them just do not have content that is not appropriate for it. And like I mentioned before, Twitter has a tendency to freak out over nothing, but this particular freak out, again, is coming from a bunch of people who don't understand anything about how the creative process works or what canon means. And normally I wouldn't make a video like this, but they are throwing around very serious accusations, such as claims that many of the writers are PDF files, or necromancers, or animal lovers. People are willfully ignoring the layout, tone, and themes of each of these stories in order to spin a narrative that is just straight up untrue. Now, before I read you some of these myths, I need to let you know that really there's two reasons why myths are made. They're either origin myths, explaining how the world was created, or they're explanatory myths, explaining why certain things the way they are. These are very clearly explanatory myths, and I'm just going to read a couple of them to you now and explain, first of all, why they're like, what they're doing, what they're trying to explain, and the morals of each of these stories are. The first of these myths are about a Slakoth and a group of girls who would torture them. And it says right there, theme, original sin based on the current Pokemon world. In the distant past, when the boundary between Pokemon and humans was still blurred, there was a woman and her companions. Every day they were bored, so they would often catch Slakoth living in a nearby forest. They played cruel games with the captured Slakoth, sometimes killing them for fun, gouging out their eyes, or cutting off their ears. Now keep in mind, this is the very first paragraph. This is explaining what these group of girls are doing are cruel, unnecessary, and just going out of their way to make the lives of these Slakoth miserable. The first bit of information here is the most important. These girls are cruel to animals. One day, the woman was walking alone in the forest and saw a Slakoth hanging from a tree. She climbed the tree to catch it, but slipped and injured herself. At that moment, a Vigoroth appeared, and this Vigoroth had a torn ear. The woman, startled, tried to flee, but her injured leg hurt too much, and she couldn't move. The Vigoroth with the torn ear suddenly attacked her when it saw her. The woman lost consciousness. When she awoke, she was in an unfamiliar place, and before her lay a clear lake surrounded by trees, from which many Slakoth and Vigoroth are hanging. All the Pokemon bore wounds somewhere on their bodies, marks left by the woman and her companions. Again, These are Slakoth that were unnecessarily and cruelly tortured by this woman. Upon closer inspection, she noticed that some of the Slakoth hanging from the trees were corpses. They were the very Slakoth that the woman and her friends had killed and discarded. The Slakoth were throwing those corpses into the lake. Terrified, the woman tried to run away, but a Slaking appeared. This Slaking also had a torn ear, and the woman realized that this was the same Vigoroth that she had seen earlier, and fear overwhelmed her, causing her to faint once more. When the woman regained consciousness, she found herself at the entrance of the forest near her home, surrounded by her friends. They carried her back to her house. Sometime later, the woman gave birth to a child, but it wasn't a human child. It was a Slakoth. She intended to abandon it, but couldn't bring herself to do so. She stopped meeting with her friends and decided to raise a Slakoth. One day, her friends, concerned about her, visited the area near her home, and they found the Slakoth sleeping there, the child of the woman. As they always did, they caught the Slakoth, stabbed it in the chest, and killed it. They took its corpse and headed to the woman's house. When she saw the slain Slakoth, the woman was overwhelmed with sorrow. She grabbed the Slakoth's body and ran deep into the forest. Her friends, shocked, chased after her. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the surroundings suddenly opened up, and they found the same clear lake from before. Around the lake were many Slakoth and Vigoroth. The woman stood before the lake and, holding the lifeless body of the slain Slakoth, threw herself into the water. Afterwards, the woman's friends began to treat Slakoth as companions, just as she had in her final moments. Now again, this story is a very clear, full story arc about a bunch of women who were animal abusers, learned that the animals had souls and had, like, you know, feelings and shit and didn't deserve to be treated like this. One of the women got comeuppance, learned the error of her ways, started to treat a Slakoth baby, and once that baby was killed by these women, she was overwhelmed with sorrow. She became one with nature. And what's frustrating me about this is that people are only focusing on the birth of the Slakoth thing. And yeah, that is scary in the sense that, oh no, what happened to that woman was terrible. But again, it's not like this was a completely innocent victim here. I'm not writing this off. You need to understand that this is how myths were written and recorded and shared back then. You had to make it scary, and you had to make it, like, as impactful as this. This is clearly an explanatory myth explaining how you need to treat the animals in this world with care and respect. Because if you don't, bad things happen to you. Yeah. On top of that, it's not like these animals will forget what you've done. You get punished for cruelty. Not only that, the woman was double punished because the son that she grew to love was killed by these same women. There's a bunch of other myths here, one based on Native American ecological philosophy, where two different humans were hunting a bunch of Rapidash, and one of the humans who was cruel and didn't live in harmony with nature was eventually killed because he was mistaken for a Rapidash that he killed, and he wore its mane. There was another one talking about how this, like, Nephilim of Pokemon, human, and God created a child that would, like, unite the world and some stuff. And then finally there was one that's just really funny. I don't know why this one, like, actually really threw me aside. It said, one day a man was walking on the beach and he found a male octane. I think that's an octillery, washed up on the beach. The man mated with the octillery and threw her into the sea. The next day he went to the same place and found it. He then mated with it again. I'm sorry, that's really funny, because, like, you know, mate with me once, shame on you. That octane came back for seconds, okay? And then later that octane talked to them. I just want to imagine, like, at what point did the man find out the octane could talk? Because if he talked to it the first time, then yeah, everything is on the up and up, right? That's an intelligent creature. But if he learned it could talk, like, the second or third time, oops. One of the most obnoxious takes I've seen is that people are claiming that there are canonical stories of Pokemon bad touching humans and taking them as wives and stuff. And that's not true. It's not canonical because it never made it into the game. It never saw the light of day until this leak happened. Canon doesn't occur until it's put into a published work. What's frustrating me is people clearly don't understand the creative process here. You don't just sit there, meditate, and then a perfect story manifests in front of you. It is a process where you gather a bunch of mediocre to bad ideas, shave off the bad ones until you have presentable and good ideas. Future editing, Stuart here. Just to prove a point, this video was originally 20 minutes long. These creation myths were clearly made as just a pitch or a basic concept. Clearly the ones where humans capture and then just casually mate with Pokemon and throw them away were never made to be put into the game. They were probably just like, hey, I need some ideas for myths. Can you write down a couple of them? No bad idea is a bad idea yet. We'll just throw out the ones we won't use. And people are clearly don't understand that that's part of the process. Sometimes you come up with some stinkers and you never know, maybe that stinker inspired a good idea. That happens all the time. In fact, just to plug myself again, that happened with my own book. I wrote a book recently called The Complete Waifu Handbook, and in my original lore, I had this character named Daphne who was the last of her kind, and like she was this sad hobo just kind of wandering the world. And then in my latest version, I changed that completely, where she and her dynasty run this 400-year-old country, and they're one of the most successful royal families on the planet. It's just part of the process. Your first idea is very rarely your last one. And something, again, you need to understand, and this is really, really frustrating me with Twitter lately, they have no patience or understanding or even bother to comprehend why the Japanese would come up with stories like this. Their idea of magical creatures, which we're going to call yokai, which is basically what Pokemon are nothing like the monsters that we have in our own mythologies. In Western mythologies, monsters are basically mindless beasts. Just as a quick and dirty example, think of a dragon. A dragon in Western society is basically a great mindless creature that flies in the sky, burns down villages, and like just eat things. Future editing, Stuart here. I actually decided to turn on the studio lights for this one. So I'm actually wrong here. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of old stories of dragons taking virgins and stealing treasure and like making women their wives and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. It's got all that stuff in it. These are classic stories that we just don't tell anymore. And frankly, I think there is something lost with that because some of y'all are just giant pussies, especially if you're overreacting this strongly to unreleased stuff that was never meant to be made public. But Japanese yokai are way different. Do you understand why we have cat girls and fox girls nowadays? Why they're so popular when it comes to Japanese media? That's because these yokai would shapeshift in between magical and human forms, and they would procreate with humans. That's just a part of their mythology. It's not just sexy, it's culture. A bunch of people are freaking out about this Typhlosion that captured a girl and made it his wife, but that is based on a Japanese badger yokai that would imitate humans and capture girls. This is nothing new. They just basically repurposed it into the Typhlosion monster. And even in the Pokemon anime, the line between Pokemon and human was often very blurred. They usually had very human-like intelligence. Just look at Meowth. It taught itself to talk because it wanted to impress a Pokemon that thought it liked humans. And again, this is one of the reasons why I hate it when Westerners dissect Japanese media, because they have no idea what they're fucking talking about. Oftentimes, they come out as straight up racist, and for whatever reason, that is just acceptable on Twitter. There's actually a really good piece of advice that Twitter does share that if you're just not smart enough to understand that these magical creatures are separated from reality, just know that it wasn't made for you.